procedures to alleviate your condition. Now, as I said before, the primary area is very accessible, and a lot of people that can well afford to pay do abuse it. I know from personal experience with it that they do abuse it, and perhaps if a fairer system was put in where everybody across the board pays a certain amount, like a levy or contribution, whatever you might choose to call it, whether then that better health care would be available to all Australians, hospitals would then be better staffed, and you wouldn't have to wait so long on the public waiting list.
Question. When we look at our healthcare system, I mean, people do pay a levy. You pay your Medicare, all of health. The rest of health is funded out of our taxation system, so company tax, capital gains tax, but also our progressive personal income tax system with higher income earners paying more tax than lower income earners. And we've actually reduced the number of people paying tax, 1 million less pay tax now because we've made a system where you don't pay tax at all now unless you earn more than $18,200. So that's, you know, where the money comes from. In terms of how it should go into the system, this is a big values call, and the way Medicare, and we made it when we created the free public hospital system, is that the best thing is to have a universal system that's everyone's in. Yes, some people go to private hospitals, have private health insurance, but a universal system that everyone's in, because that's the best way of making sure it's a high quality system. I would fear that if we created a dual track system, so they're the hospitals that the lower income people go to, and over here are the hospitals that the middle and upper income people go to, that over time the hospitals the poorer people go to would end up being very, very second class places. And if you look at some American TV, I think there's a reason for thinking you could end up there. I think that's, you know, in part where America's ended up with many of its healthcare debates. So Medicare is a universalist system. Anyone can get bulk billed if they go to a bulk billing professional. Anyone here could go to the hospital with something wrong with us. What can we do to then increase the quality of the system and the number of beds and places? Well, it's about some more money, and it's also about reform. We're putting in a lot more money. 900 million here in Victoria over the next 4 years, extra money. So, you know, on top of the billions that already go in, and we're trying to use that money to leverage change through the state governments that manage the hospitals to reduce waiting lists and to reduce emergency waiting times. We've got more to do there because you haven't seen waiting lists go down in this state despite there being more money. So we're going to keep the pressure on so that people do see the benefits of those waiting list reductions.
Valentina, thank you very much for that. Look, we are out of time for questions. The great thing about these forums is their unpredictability, and we've certainly covered a wide range of topics tonight, from school funding to the NBN, food security and foster care as well. So well done to all of you, and thank you so much for coming along and taking part in this. Before you leave, don't forget your wristbands and your opportunity to vote on whether the Prime Minister has won you over. You support Julia Gillard, yes, no, or still undecided. There are 3 boxes there, so don't forget to do that. But before you leave, please, would you thank Prime Minister Julia Gillard?
And as David Spears mentioned there, a broad range of issues covered. There were 2 on the Gonski reforms towards the end, 2 on the education cuts, the higher education cuts that are going to pay for those Gonski reforms, a couple on same-sex marriage. There were questions on the surplus, the budgetary situation, or the plans for a surplus, when they might that might be achieved. A question on asylum seekers as well, but all very big picture. Nothing really local again in this Nunawading area. We talked about the roads and so on before, but again, focusing on national issues tonight, as we saw last week with Tony Abbott's People's Forum in Geelong. With me to dissect the last hour, the questions, the responses from Prime Minister Gillard and her performance, we've got the National Political Editor with the Herald Sun, Phil Hudson, and the National Economics Editor with News Limited, Jessica Irvine. Good to see you both. What did you think?
Look, I thought it was, as we said, a unpredictable forum where lots of interesting questions came up, particularly the Prime Minister being asked questions that she said had stumped her and she had never heard of before. We had retired teacher George who wanted to pay more tax.
That was extraordinary.
It was. She was lost for words, and there was quite a bit on superannuation, which we'll probably discuss, and also the foster carer that you mentioned, and the Prime Minister's now going to go away and do some work to see whether she can get some superannuation. In fact, the foster carer got some applause from the audience for her efforts.
And Jessica, I think that the Prime Minister and her office will be pleased with the way the night went. Her performance was good. As we said, we previewed beforehand, it does generally bring out her better performances. It's not the wooden sort of style that we can see in front of the camera.
Yeah, I mean, we've been treated to an hour of quite sober and respectful discussion of public policy. So she must be pleased with that. And, it seems a little bit subdued in the room. People were very much sort of sitting there. We didn't have rapturous applause for many things, except for the wonderful foster carer who had looked after 45 children in 8 years. But I think we did hear a lot of the policies that she would like to talk about. It's so broad what people are interested in. We were live cattle exports, we were taxation of charities, superannuation. I noticed there was only 4 questions on education. 2 of those were on the cuts to education, so you really wonder.
Jessica, I'm really intrigued by this. Well, I mentioned it just when I picked up from David at the end of the forum. The same was we saw the same in Geelong last week in Corangamite. The questions were all very national and big picture in their focus. They weren't to do with the local area, whether it be the local industry, roads, or whatever else. They were largely big picture issues, as you say, live exports or higher education.
I mean, maybe that is a reflection of the economy. Things are soft, but the jobless rate is still at 5.5 or something percent. We are still seeing real incomes growing. To what extent are people really worried about their jobs? We didn't hear too much about that today, and you would have thought maybe in Melbourne you might have heard more about job insecurity in the manufacturing sector, that sort of thing. But people really are taking the opportunity to have a big picture look at who do we want to be after this election? What are the really important policies? So it sort of sounds like there's fertile sort of that people are listening respectfully. I think we heard one questioner had said, "I will vote for you if you've got something for Catholic schools," and to which the government does have $1.5 billion. But then when asked, so can I have your vote, or is that people will listen to their airing of the issues that they want to talk about? And to the extent that we did talk about education tonight, that's where the government is on pretty firm territory.
Well, that's where the Prime Minister wants the debate, and she was able to articulate, as you say, a couple of those key points that where she wants the focus over coming months. And as you can see over my left shoulder, I'm sure you've been able to see our viewers, the Prime Minister being asked for a few photographs and so on. I think that she would be pleased with the general mood. This was a room full of undecided voters, like it was in Corangamite, and the mood, as Jessica said, was fairly subdued, respectful, and the questioning reasonable, although there were a few difficult ones for her, and one of them was on higher education.
I thought the interesting thing, in fact, what perhaps has got her sitting behind us now as Prime Minister, was when she was at university. She didn't like the university cuts of the Fraser government, and that's, as she said, what caused her to first raise her voice. And now she's on the other side of an argument. Now, she will, of course, as she did during the forum, argue that there's still an increase for universities. It's just a cut from the increase that it would have been, so lowering the sort of rate of increase. But still, it's interesting. She was very much able to see the other side of the argument on universities. And as we heard, it got raised a few times by people who have used that line that is getting a lot of traction of taking money off Peter to pay Paul. And I think that still is a problem the government has in explaining its changes to education.
I think if there was any doubt as to this sort of setting for the Prime Minister within her office, I think that should have gone tonight, because this is exactly what this sort of thing is what she needs to do. It does seem to disarm her in some ways. I'm not sure exactly what what happens. But the Prime Minister does communicate a lot better in this sort of setting.
And one of the questions we heard was, why haven't we heard more from you about the public policy achievements of
We
your
dropped a bit
government?
of flack.
In which we, apparently we need some